When watching the trailer for the new Gladiator movie, something at the very beginning really stuck out to me. I don't know if anybody else caught this, but I think that that's the guy from Remember the Titans. Just kidding, obviously everybody noticed Denzel Washington. What actually stuck out to me right here was the Colosseum filled with water. I thought that would be a fun project, so that's what I'm going to make today. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boil Eye Hobby Time. I've been looking for this kit for a while, and one happened to get stocked at my local hobby store last week, which was pretty convenient for this project. The kit comes with this nice informational booklet that had a bunch of information about the Colosseum, and also this picture of a ship battle, which helped me know I was on the right track. I scoured the box looking for all the little statues that I was going to need to install in the niches, and I realized that there were no 3D statues at all, but only these pictures on cardstock, which I was bummed and surprised by, but I wouldn't have been had I read the box. Oh well. I broke all the runners out of their plastic bags, including the big piece, which is the arena, which would honestly double as an excellent Caesar salad bowl. The kit also comes with these 1/500th scale gladiators, which looked familiar. I have another set of gladiators from the same company in a different scale, and was able to compare and see that most of them are the same as their miniature counterparts. I appreciate the commitment to continuity. After the base pieces were all nipped from their runners, I stuck them together and I threw the salad bowl on top. But before gluing it down, I made sure to cover the tunnels on either end using some styrene, and finally sealing it with some UV resin. This will keep the epoxy resin from leaking out all over my table when I pour it later on. Which actually gets me thinking, how did the Romans keep the water from flooding down into the underground passageways beneath the stadium when they filled it with water? Or did they just let it flood and drain it later? I could probably look it up, but if you know, you should let me know in the comments. The next step was to add all of the pillars around the top level. They make it a lot easier by having only a few with pegs to align the top ring, while it just sits on the top of the rest of the pillars. Otherwise, lining it up would be an absolute nightmare, because there are a lot of them. Once all of the pillars had been glued in place, I threw on all the sections of the top ring. It was the only part of the model kit that didn't line up very well, so it was probably user error. So as not to ruin the cardboard statues, I decided to paint all of the sides separately before adding them to the Colosseum. I flipped over my hobby mat from assembly mode to paint mode, and I got fresh paint water. After that, I loaded up my airbrush and began priming everything with black. After all the outer wall panels had been primed, I gave the arena a thin coat of black in all of the recesses, followed by a more full prime of white from the top. I gave the walls the same zenithal treatment before lightly going over everything with an aged white, not giving full coverage to keep some of the values that had been established by the black and white primers, and once the walls and the arena were a nice sandy tan color, it was time to paint the rings around the inside. I switched from an airbrush to a brush to paint all of the red rings on the inside of the arena that separate the different sections. With the division of the Roman social classes established, it was time to paint the details on the exterior walls, which were mostly just all the little red pointy poles and some bronze shields. After that, it was time for an oil wash. I did a test on one wall section to make sure I liked it before committing to the rest, and I did like it, so I committed to the rest. I gave the interior of the arena the same treatment, with the burnt umber oil wash dabbed off with paper towels and Q-tips, and after some time under the hairdryer, the painting was done. But it actually wasn't done because I realized that I had forgotten to paint these claymores, which are actually the door frames for all of the entrances, which I painted off camera. And with that, the time had come to install the statues. I cut out each section of 8 and glued it to the back of its corresponding wall section. And once all of the niches had been thoroughly statued, it was time to glue the wall sections in place. After the first 10 wall pieces were on, I realized that the gap at the top, behind the pillars, looked terrible. I didn't think that was going to be visible. So to fix the problem, I cut a strip of styrene to fit in the gap, which I painted black. Once the black strip of styrene had been glued in place, I put the rest of the walls on. And with that, the construction of the Colosseum was done. Except it wasn't done because I hadn't installed the claymores, which were actually the door frames at each entrance. Once those had been glued in place, the construction was actually done. There was a brief moment that I thought about filling the stadium with people. I looked at the booklet and I learned that it held 50 to 70,000 people. So I think not. Which meant the next step in the process was to build my little ships. These are familiar to me because I have played Age of Empires. I broke out my box of wood scraps, and I pulled out a few scraps to make some boats. I found a stick that was the right size and I whittled it into ship shape, or into the shape of a ship. I then hollowed out the deck and I drilled some holes for a mast and some oars, which I made from little rods of styrene. While installing the oars, I couldn't help but wonder if Ben-Hur had ever gone to watch a reenactment of a boat battle at the Colosseum during his time in Rome. Once the oars were in place, I trimmed them and flattened the ends with some pliers, and then I installed a sail, and my little Macedonian pirate ship was done. Next up was the classic Greek trireme with the goofy looking nose. I cut out the shape on my bandsaw and refined it with an emery board and some tiny files. I repeated all the same steps with the sail and the oars that I did on the first ship, and to set the sails in position, I used some thin superglue and accelerator. With that, the construction on the ships was done and they were ready to be painted, and while I paint them, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. After putting the ships on a painting handle, I primed them black, followed by a layer of tan sprayed from above. I then switched over to a brush and I added all of the highlights, and then I painted one of the sails red and I painted the other one brown. And now that I'm looking back on this, I can't believe that I forgot to paint the eyes on the trireme. After a little pin wash, my ships were done and they were ready to fight each other in the ring. I kept the ships on the standoffs that I had painted them on, and then I glued them so they were slightly elevated from the floor of the arena. Then I mixed up my quick and simple shallow pour epoxy resin. I tinted the resin with a slightly exaggerated sea green color, and then I poured it into the bottom of the arena. Once that had been poured, I popped all the little bubbles as they rose to the surface with a butane torch, and I left it for 24 hours. When it was fully cured, it was ready for some texture. I used some water ripple effects from Woodland Scenics, which I stippled over the surface to make the tiny waves. The last thing to do was to paint a tiny 1/500th scale Denzel Washington. I'm not really sure what his role is in the movie, but we'll just say that he is in the stadium reviewing a rehearsal for the following day's performance. Once John Q had been fully painted, I put him in place, and after that, I called it good. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out, as always, to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.